This is Jewish Spotlight, a weekly television program presented by Chabad Lubavitch of Long Island, featuring various aspects of modern Jewish life and Jewish culture. Now, here is your host, Rabbi Tuvia Teldin.
Shalom. Of course, all of us are aware of the terrible situation, the challenges that are faced in Israel concerning trying to come to some type of peace in our Holy Land. However, the challenges are much more than I think most Americans are aware of. Personally, I am constantly amazed by the lack of knowledge and the lack of responsibility perhaps much of the press has taken in terms of truly exposing to the American public the real facts of what is going on behind the scenes in Israel. And of course, we speak about the ability to have peace. We all want peace. There's no question about that. But let's be real. And this show, for the next half hour, is about being real. We're going to talk about what is really going on behind the scenes of the Palestinian propaganda and what is really happening with the Palestinian people. In order to be able to do this, and it's a very difficult process, but we have to do it to know the full picture of what we face in order to make a true peace. For this purpose, we have with us somebody representing TruePeace.org, a Jewish organization dedicated to trying to establish a true peace in Israel and educate the public to what the challenges are. We have with us the Associate Director for TruePeace.org, who is Zelig Krimko, and we're very happy to have with us today. Zelig, it's a pleasure to have you on our show, and I hope that we'll be able to really educate the public to whatever degree we possibly can as to what the challenges are they're facing.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good. How did you get involved with this, and what is your main point for trying to teach people about these problems that we're facing?
Sure. I was working as Director of Public Relations for an internet company in Los Angeles, and 3 close friends of mine were killed by Arab terrorists in Israel this past year. And I decided I wanted to come back to New York, where most of the Jewish organizations have their base, and work for True Peace.
Okay.
True Peace focuses on educating the American public as to the current true situation of what's going on in Israel and in the territories, Judea, Samaria, Gaza, what people know as the West Bank and Gaza.
All right. Without further ado, what I want to do is really get to the video, because I've seen your video. It's very, very powerful, and I think that this is a true example of a picture being worth 1,000 words. So let's switch over to see that video, and we'll further discuss these issues right after our audience sees the video. The video is about 15 minutes, but please stay in your seats, put your seatbelt on, because it's very moving, very emotional, very charged. Let's switch over and see the video now.
As the Middle East crisis makes headlines in the United States, violent images dominate the news. But as we consider who's responsible for the violence, disturbing evidence exists Americans are getting only a part of the story. As you'll see in this report, while talking peace for the cameras of foreign news organizations, PLO chief Yasser Arafat says very different things to Palestinian audiences. Behind an Arab language barrier, Arafat and his PLO-controlled television deliver a message not seen in America.
Enough of blood and tears. Enough.
Our desire to win the peace jackpot grew out of what we had hoped was a revolutionary change in the PLO. Arafat was going to renounce violence and discipline violators.
2 מחבלים, חברי ארגון החמאס מעזה, פורצים לפתע לרובע הבילויים, נחלת שבעה במרכז ירושלים, תוך שהם יורים מאות כדורים לכל עבר.
We dreamed peace was possible because Arafat said he would contain Hamas. Instead of stopping terrorism, Arafat gave it a green light.
أن نستمر في هذا الجهاد الطويل والجهاد الصعب.
הבוקר ב9:20 שוב היכה הטרור, צומת בית ליד. כבכל יום ראשון בבוקר ממתינים כאן בתחנות ההסעה עשרות חיילים.
מצד אחד הרשות הפלסטינית, ערפאת אומר, המדיניות שלי איננה פיגועים, אני נגד פיגועים. מצד שני הוא מאפשר, הנה פה בקלקיליה, הצגות כאלה בהצהרות של חמאס, שבהם מה שאנחנו נראה זה מין שחזור של פיגוע באוטובוס. זאת אומרת, הדברים האלה מתנהלים כל הזמן בעת ובעונה אחת.
שוב פעל כאן מחבל מתאבד, ועל פי גרסה לא רשמית, צעיר בן 24 הלומד הנדסה באוניברסיטת ביר זית.
זה כנראה מקום הפיצוץ, זה המקום שבו עמד כנראה המחבל המתאבד. אנחנו לא רואים כאן שרידים של מה שיכולה להיות מכונית תופת, ולכן ההנחה היא שזה מחבל.
רחוב הומה במיוחד בשעה הזאת, נמסר על 4 הרוגים, אולי יותר.
ואני בقول هذا الكلام في ذكرى هؤلاء الشهداء الأبطال العظام أبو إياد وأبو الهول وأبو محمد وقبلهم أبو جهاد وقبلهم يحيى عياش وبعدهم يحيى عياش.
الآن الأرض مقابل السلام، الأرض مقابل السلام، مش الأمن مقابل السلام، مش الأمن مقابل السلام.
יש לך ימים שלמים שבהם אזורים שאתה רגיל לראות התפרעויות שקטים לגמרי. מה שקורה זה שלפי תכנון ותזמון מוכן מראש, ואי אפשר לקרוא את המצב אחרת. פשוט אי אפשר. הם יוצאים לנקודות חיכוך נבחרות ומייצרים את העימות עם הצבא. ראית מה קרה ברצועת עזה? ברגע שצה"ל שינה את הטופוגרפיה המיידית שסביב נצרים, נצרים חדלה להיות מוקד, העבירו אותו לאן? לכפר דרום.
אוטובוס הילדים שיצא ב7:45 בבוקר מכפר דרום, המטען פגז ארטילרי 155 מילימטר. ברור שהאנשים שביצעו את הפיגוע הזה, אנשי פתח תנזים, שמו להם למטרה לפגוע באוטובוס הילדים של כפר דרום. זה לא מטרה מקרית, הם המתינו. לפני כן הייתה שם פתיחת ציר של צה"ל, כאשר הם לא הפעילו את המטען לעברה, אלא חיכו לאוטובוס הילדים.
When he described the Fatah and Hamas as 2 wings of the same bird, we looked the other way. When he told us he would end the conflict peacefully, we strained to believe him.
أو في واحدة فيكم تعبانة تروح تقعد في بيتها وتبعت لأولادها وتبعت لأولادها.
Parte de los palestinos. Y también me gustaría saber que me explicara por qué Al-Fatah entrena a niños para que salgan con armas a la calle, poniendo en riesgo clarísimamente sus vidas. Gracias.
¿Estabas con ellos? Estabas tú con ellos. Dame una prueba de que tú lo que dices es verdad, es cierto. Tú me preguntas una pregunta
où les enfants de 7 à 16 ans apprennent à faire la guerre. Leur moment favori, monter et démonter une Kalachnikov. Devenir un guerrier pour de vrai, pour quelques instants seulement.
Ahmed explica como adoram as armas e como aprendem rapidamente. Aqui ensinam-nos a caçar.
Ici, nous apprenons à chasser les ennemis.
It looks good, but the nightmares return.
ילדים שם מתחנכים על שנאה.
שמה אומרים ספציפית?
האם לא ברור לנו למה עלינו להילחם ולהרוג את היהודים ולגרש אותם ממדינתנו? חייבים לבצע ג'יהאד. בכל ארצנו תשוחרר.
אבל זה לא של משרד החינוך הפלסטיני.
זה של משרד החינוך הפלסטיני.
ولذلك إخواني نحن نصنع تاريخنا ما نصنعوش تاريخ كلمة ولا بالصورة ولا بالكتاب ولكن نصنعه بالحجر الفلسطيني.
مكتوب على عمرنا أجيال ورا أجيال هتعيش على حلمنا واللي نقول اليوم مكتوب على عمرنا جاي الظلام الليل يبعدنا يوم إنما يكسر شعاع النور يوصل لأبعد سما جاي الظلام الليل يبعدنا يوم إنما يكسر شعاع النور
ברחמנות זעק חייל המילואים שמואל מאירי לעבר עשרות הצעירים שסקלו אותו באכזריות. מאירי בן 41.
This is the PLO version of Sesame Street.
إذا احتجت على باب القدس أصبحت فدائيا أصبحت فدائيا بزي مقاتلي بزي مقاتلي بزي مقاتلي وشكرا. برافو 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 برافو. وكل عروبتي للثأر تحرير تدعوني وصوت مؤذن الأقصى وصوت مؤذن الأقصى. لعمرك أني أرى مصرعي ولكن أغدو إليه الخطى.
تقولي إن البر وإن البحر هادي قرب يومك يا محتل وجي نصفي لحسابي واحسبنا ما منه خلاص بالحجارة والرصاص.
لعمرك إني أرى مصرعي ولكني أسرع إليه الخطى. لعمرك هذا ممات الرجال.
وناجي لما استشهد احنا قبلنا بالافراح وقلت لامه زغرتي ناجي بطل ما تبكي عليه ولا تبكي على بطل زي هذا.
اولادي اولادي يا بلادي اولادي اولادي يا بلادي في المجموعه الانتحاريه في المجموعه الانتحاريه.
Arafat's pretty words fed the fantasy of peace.
والولاية والسيادة الولاية الدينية والسيادة السياسية للشعب الفلسطيني.
Instead of moving step by step to end this conflict, we walked right into Arafat's step-by-step plan.
احنا اتخذنا القرار بأن نبدأ تحرير الوطن خطوة خطوة.
فلسطين للفلسطينيين ونقول حق العودة حق العودة حق العودة حق العودة حق العودة.
نجد أي شيء للآثار العبرية في أرض
ولا نجد
ولا نجد
لسبب بسيط
وهم أن لم يكونوا هناك إطلاقا.
لا علاقة بيهود اليوم بكل ادعاءاتهم بيهود الأمس القدامى.
فقد أتيت يا عماه تدريبي على الرشاش عودة وقد دربت أصحابي من الأطفال والصبيان وأقسمنا سنسأل من أعادينا لقتلانا وجرحانا.
كل الأرض فلسطين.
وقعت اتفاقيات غزة والضفة الغربية فلن ننسى حيفا وعكا والجليل ويافا والمثلث والنقب وغير ذلك من مدننا وقرانا وما هي إلا مسألة وقت.
באוניברסיטת ביר זית התכנס היום פאנל שכותרתו המשך האינתיפאדה. בנוכחים חבר הכנסת מוחמד ברכה מחד"ש, לצידם של מרואן ברגותי מפתח, חסן יוסף מנהיג בולט של חמאס ואבו עלי מוסטפא מהחזית העממית.
نحن نحيي ونثمن هذه الانتفاضة. هي للانتفاضة التي أعادت رسم الخارطة التاريخية الحقيقية لفلسطين من النهر إلى البحر حيث تعانت شعبنا كله.
نعم إننا نتضامن مع الحدث، نتضامن مع انتفاضة شعبنا الفلسطيني.
to Jerusalem, the capital of our independent Palestinian state. To accept or not to accept, let him go to hell.
فهذا هو شأن اليهود، فلا ترحموا اليهود في أي موقع كان وفي أي موطن. قاتلوهم أينما كنتم، حيثما ثقفتموهم فاقتلوهم أينما تكون.
Almost 25,000 people see this. It's very powerful. If you get this to the right people.
שני מחבלים, חברי ארגון החמאס מעזה, פורצים לפתע לרובע הבילויים, נחלת שבעה במרכז ירושלים.
ברור שהאנשים שביצעו את הפיגוע הזה, אנשי פתח תנזים, שמו להם למטרה לפגוע באוטובוס הילדים של כפר דרום.
מתחנכים על שנאה.
واقتلنا سنسأل من أعادينا.
אוסלו מאפשרת לנו להיות שכנים הגונים במקום אויבים מושבעים, לחיות בכבוד הדדי.
لو وصلنا إلى طريق المسدود وعودة إلى النضال والنزاع كما نحن 40 سنة
It's mentioned a few times.
As the United States considers its path in the Middle East, the question is, which is real? Arafat's promises of peace or his demands for destruction? While America decides, Palestinians appear to have made up their minds.
ابن فلسطين أبدا ما بالين قرآن بيمينه بشمالي سكين.
I know that for all of us watching that, it's a very, very difficult piece of film to be able to sit and watch. To see the type of hatred that is being literally put into the blood and the milk of Palestinian children, of the educators, of the politicians, of the religious worshipers, is so incredible for us to be able to see. It's really something culturally that we are not able to comprehend. This really is what is so shocking about this film that you brought to us, that to me, even though some of these selections are from 96, 97, 94, but they're current as far as exactly what's going on amongst the people of the Palestinian areas. And this is what hurts so much, and what makes true peace so difficult and so challenging, is a cultural stigma on hatred for everything that has to do with Israel. How do you overcome that?
How do you overcome that? I think the number one thing that Israel needs to do as soon as possible is dismantle this media, which is brainwashing the Arab population within Israel to hate, to kill, to commit acts of terror.
It's also the educational system, the textbooks, it's so much of it.
This all stems from the terrorist Palestinian Authority regime, and this regime must be dismantled.
And they've also created this martyrdom of the ideal state of somebody giving up their life for the sake of Palestine.
Sure. I think the mistake that Israel made, and the mistake that Israel realizes that they made, is they began to negotiate with the likes of Osama bin Laden. They began to negotiate with Yasser Arafat, the chief terrorist in the region of the Holy Land, and they've allowed this terrorist infrastructure to be established in the very heartland of the land of Israel.
And to really take over the minds and the hearts of so many of the Palestinian people.
Of the Arabs who live within the land of Israel, who choose to call themselves Palestinians.
Right. You know, you've also brought some maps, which I think would be very helpful for people to look at. If you could maybe give us a little bit of an idea what's there, and I'd like to put that in perspective also. I think it'll help us understand what exactly we saw in the last 15 minutes.
Well, Rabbi, I'll tell you, most people don't realize what we're talking about when we say Israel against the Arabs or the Palestinians against Israel. I think it's really important to visualize it, to see really what's going on. And I'll just quickly show people
let's take a look at
the current situation. Okay, there are 5 million Jews in the Middle East, in the land of Israel. It's a tiny island of Jews surrounded by 400 million Arabs on all sides. Israel is the size of the state of New Jersey. Israel fits into New York State 3 times. And this is including all the lands that were liberated in the 1967 war, which people call the occupied territories, which Jews call the liberated territories, with the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, Gaza. There are 21 Arab countries which are larger than the entire United States. From Mauritania to Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Somalia. Iran is not an Arab country, it's a Muslim country, but they're also enemies of Israel. And Israel is right in the middle of all of this. The Arabs have launched wars against Israel in 1948, the Independence War, in 1967, the Six-Day War, and in 1973, the Yom Kippur War. And they've failed, thank God, to destroy Israel from the outside. So now they've realized that the Arabs who are occupying our land from the inside, who are settlers within the land of Israel, who call themselves Palestinians because they want to wipe out all Jewish connection to the land of Israel and call it Palestine. These Arabs, they've chosen to use these people as a mechanism to destroy Israel from the inside. I'll just quickly show you what we're talking about over here. The land of Israel, as we know, was promised by God to the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to the people of Israel. And the land of Israel, as we mentioned, is very tiny. Within the land of Israel, there are over 3 million Arabs who are literally settlers, call themselves Palestinians. Most of them live in areas called the West Bank, as many of us have heard, and Gaza. The West Bank is the entire central part of Israel, the entire heart of the land of Israel, the Holy Land. Hebron, for example, which is a 30-minute ride south of Jerusalem, where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, and Leah are buried, is right in the middle of the quote-unquote West Bank. Joseph, the tzaddik, Joseph, who was brought up from Egypt and was buried in Nablus, in Shechem, is right in the center of these areas. Now, the West Bank and the Gaza are areas that are very close to Israel's population centers. Judea and Samaria, the word Jew, the Jews, the word Jew comes from the word Judea, which was over here, south of Jerusalem, which they call the West Bank, which they call the quote-unquote Palestinian territories. These areas are so close to Israel's population centers. 75% of Israel's population and industry, over 3 million Jews, and most of the industry and factories are located in the central coastal plain. This is where Tel Aviv is. This is where Netanya is. This is where all the suburbs, Ra'anana, Herzliya, Kfar Sava. And this area, before 1967, was 9 miles wide. I just want to show people, for people to understand how tiny this is. Manhattan, north to south, is something like 12 miles wide. Israel, God forbid, without the territories, if Israel would give away these areas, would only be 9 miles wide at its narrowest point. And this really, this small area, this narrow waistline of the land of Israel is, again, where the bulk of the 5 million Jews are located. There are also over 200,000 Jewish people living in what are called settlements, which are actually Jewish towns and suburbs in these areas. If you see the red and the yellow are areas that were given away to Arafat's terrorist henchmen and to this Palestinian terrorist authority. And most of the West Bank was offered by the former prime minister in exchange for peace to the Palestinian Authority, and they said no, they refused. And they decided, we're going to try to destroy the entire Israel. We're going to try to take back everything, not just these areas. And as you've seen on the show, on the videotape, by the way, which is available for everyone by being in contact with us.
What is your number? The True Peace number is?
The True Peace number, truepeace.org, by the way, is this organization that we work with for those of you that have joined us later on in the show. And our number is 1-877-TRUE-PEACE. That's 1-877-TRUEPEACE. This video that you saw is available. We want you to send it out to your friends, your relatives, to show it to as many people as possible. Those of you who have connections with the media, those of you who work with the media, it's very important to show this to people, what's really going on in Israel and how the 5 million Jews are really endangered by these terrorists within the country. And as you can see, literally, the entire central part of Israel, the entire heart of Israel, is what they're thinking to give away to these terrorists. This obviously is just an overview, but a lot more information is available on our website, truepeace.org.
All right. Well, those maps definitely spell it out as far as exactly what the situation is in Israel. There's no question about that. Now, the real challenge is, of course, for the leaders in Israel to be able to, as you say, reach into the Palestinian minds and hearts and convince them that peace is the best interest. But the problem is, again, religiously, culturally, if this is possible. This might be a situation that could take a generation. And we might be forcing something that just is not naturally within the ability of the people to do.
Sure, Rabbi, because of their religion and because of their nationalist upbringing, they can't deal with Israel existing. They believe Tel Aviv is Palestine. They believe Haifa is Palestine. They believe every Israeli city is Palestine. Of course, there
are many Arabs that are willing to compromise. It's just that they are not necessarily the majority, and they're not the vocal majority.
Not only they're not the majority, but the government, the Arab government within Israel, the Palestinian Authority, the terrorist regime, is brainwashing the people through television, through the radio, through the textbooks, through the educational system, to kill Jews, and also, to destroy all of Israel, and not to compromise.
We saw how, by the failed Camp David, how the compromises, of course, went literally way up to the maximum, and still, of course, it was not acceptable, which gives all of us the message that Arafat is not in a position to be able to make any type of compromise. So I want to thank you very much for being with us. I want to encourage everybody to really look up the website, call the 877 True Peace number, find out more about what the reality is and what the challenges are. I want to thank you very much, Zelig, for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
Meantime, shalom, everybody. Think about it. Shalom.
Moshiach,